大家晚上好，我是顾立民。本周我们将非常荣幸地邀请到著名的约翰·凯勒博士 （Dr. John Keller）。你可能听说过他的名字，没错，他就是著名的 ARCS 模型（ARCS 模型）的发明者。我非常的激动啊！ARCS 模型呢是教育与学习动机的设计模型。凯勒博士呢，将一生的精力都投入到了教育与学习动机的研究和实践当中去，而且呢，桃李满天下。我的好几个朋友都是他的博士生。但是为什么 ARCS 模型、ARCS 模型可以让员工充满动力的去学习呢？ARCS 模型是怎么做到的呢？ARCS 模型到底是什么呢？为什么 ARCS 模型不仅仅可以应用到学习发展领域，而且是一个通用的动机模型，在各个领域几乎都可以应用呢？那么本周就请我们就非常荣幸的有请 Dr. John Keller 来给我们进行解码。好，下面我们请大家进行收看。Hi, Dr. Keller.
Or good afternoon, evening for you.
It is good evening here. It's a late night here in Shanghai, and we are so glad, and I am personally so glad to have you on, to have you to accept our invitation to attend the Training Masters series.
Thank you for including me. I was in Shanghai quite a few years ago, and I really loved it. I had very good experience there.
You were as a tourist, or you were here?
No, as a presenter, as a scholar. Yeah, I was invited to do addresses in several places in China.
Great. So it was a national conference, or what occasion?
No, it was just a personal invitation from the Ministry of Education, and so I hadn't thought about it, but I presented in yes, several different cities. So, and then ended up going to the Great Wall. Yeah, so had a wonderful time.
Everybody goes to the Great Wall when you're in Beijing.
That's right.
So how did you find China? Was that your first time or a couple of times?
That was my second time. The first time was a very brief stop. I stopped to see a former student there on my way to Indonesia.
I see. And when was the first time? Which year was that?
I don't remember. I'd have to look it up, but it was quite a long time ago.
Can I call you John?
Please do. Yes.
Yes, John. May I know how old are you?
How old am I? I'm 82 years old.
Wow, you're still young.
Oh yeah, I wish. Nice of you to say that.
By the UN definition, you were in the middle age.
Is that right? Okay.
Anyway, we're so glad to have you on. And John, your name, your name has been in my professional world for very long as it gets, because of your work, especially your ARCS model, which we'll cover more deeply in many angles during this interview. But first of all, for our audience, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us where you grew up, where you went to college, what you studied, and tell us where you live now.
Sure, I'll be glad to do that. Yeah, I was born in Oklahoma, in the central part of the United States, in 1942, I think it was. When I was like 5 years old, my father was drafted into the Navy. That was during the Second World War. So we all went to San Diego, California. And I lived in San Diego for about 3 years. And then we moved back to Oklahoma. And I lived in different places in Oklahoma until I finished junior high school. And then my family moved back to San Diego. So I went to secondary school in San Diego. And so after I graduated from secondary school, I went to San Diego State University for 1 semester. But then I wasn't ready for college yet. So I joined the United States Marine Corps, and I was in the Marines for 4 years. That was a very productive experience. I worked in flight simulators and electronics. So I learned a lot of foundational knowledge that really paid off later when I went into instructional systems. So when I was discharged from the Marine Corps, I let's see, the next step was to go to the um, yeah, I went to San Diego State. I finished my bachelor's degree, and then I taught secondary school for several years. Taught English and language and different performing arts things. And then I went to graduate school at Indiana University. I was there
Wow.
for 4 years. And then from there I joined the faculty at Syracuse University. And I had a very productive experience up there. I say up there because that was the furthest north I had ever lived. And then in 1989, I moved to Tallahassee, joined the faculty at Florida State University until I'm still here. I retired in 2010. You know, I did a lot of traveling, so I've been to many
Right.
different countries and had a rich experience.
And which year did you retire?
Pardon me?
Which year did you retire?
It was 2010.
2010. Yep, got it. Thank you. And thank you. And Syracuse University is both Indiana and Syracuse University are very good universities in instructional design, and they're
Yeah.
almost called. There are many hubs in the continental United States, and they're instructional system design and technology centric. And like San Diego, like University of Minnesota, like FSU, Florida State University, and Indiana and Syracuse, and so on and so forth. And Syracuse University, in Chinese, called the Snow City University.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, have you
Well,
heard about that?
it's also called Salt City. They had salt mines there.
Okay.
Historically, there were the water would evaporate from the Great Lake area there, and then they would harvest the salt and then let it fill up with water again, and they kept mining salt. In fact, they call the football team Saltine Warriors.
I see. I see. Great. It was it is so interesting to see your where you have been, where you have done your research and practice. And it came to my attention that your biggest known work, of course, you've done many areas of research, and you have been Professor Emeritus, a retired Professor Emeritus from Florida State University. As a matter of fact, we had Roger Kaufman on
Yes.
a couple times earlier, and a couple weeks earlier, and also I interviewed Bob Branson a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's a group, and also Bob Reiser is also on my list.
Is he?
Yes,
All
yes.
right.
There are so many renowned retired professors that you are one of them, and you have devoted all of your life and spent more than 40 years and over 50 years or even 60 years just in this area, keep cultivating and doing research, conducting research and development. And of course, the most noticeable, well-known of your work is ARCS model, the ARCS model. Just for our audience, Dr. Keller invented the ARCS model, ARCS. The A stands for attention, R stands for relevance, C stands for confidence, and S stands for satisfaction. That's a model of instructional design, and it was published in 1983. Well, it was first invented in 1979, if I got that right. So, well, instead of me telling our audience, so Dr. John, will you please tell us, describe ARCS model for us, and would you please?
All right. Yeah, I developed the ARCS model after I joined the faculty at Syracuse University. I had to have an area of research to focus on, and my research in my PhD program involved computer-based equipment to set up stimulus conditions. I didn't have that capability at Syracuse, So I started asking myself, what am I going to do? What am I going to focus on? And and my research was narrowly focused before that, like educational psychology research on the concept of learned helplessness, locus of control, things like that. And so one day, coincidentally, a professor from another department came by my office to introduce himself and to say, John, I understand that your research is in motivation. And I said, yeah, okay. He says, can you recommend a measurement tool of motivation that I can use? Because I do quite a bit of consulting work and I could really use a motivation measurement tool. And I thought his name was Vince. And I said, well, Vince, I don't know. Let me think about it. So as I thought about it, I realized that I could recommend 4 or 5 different measurement tools, each of which measured a particular aspect of motivation, like locus of control, learned helplessness, curiosity, and so forth. But I could not recommend one measure that encompassed all of the different dimensions of motivation. So that stimulated me to start thinking more broadly about motivation than I had previously. And I thought, well, is it possible to invent a comprehensive measure of motivation that can that could be useful? And I said, well, in order to do that, we have to synthesize the literature on motivation to put it together into like one theory. So what I did was I designed a graduate seminar, and it only had like 5 or 6 students. And so then we worked together to begin to comprehensively review all of the research on motivation. And from that work came the we identified on 3x5 cards, we wrote down as many different concepts as motivation as we could find. And then we sorted the cards into piles and came up with a central theme for each pile. And so out of that is what grew the foundation for what became the ARCS model, and it's called the ARCS. The first category. You want me to continue then to describe?
Oh yeah, please.
Okay. The first requirement, if you're going to motivate students, is to get their attention, stimulate their curiosity. And
Right.
so once you've done that, then student might say, okay, you got my attention, but I don't know if I'm interested in this content or not, if it's meaningful to me. So the second step is to make it relevant. You have to build a bridge to the student so they perceive the relevance of the instruction. So then we've got AR, attention and relevance. And then, but the third step might be a student might say, okay, yeah, well, I agree this is important, but I don't think I can learn it. I'm not confident I can learn it. So the third step is to create a sense of confidence in the learner to help them believe that they can learn the content. So there we have ARC, the main parts. And then at the end, the students need to believe that, all right, this is it's useful, and it's important. But do I feel good? Do I want to use it? Do I want to know this? Do I want to apply it? So the final step is to create a sense of reward, reinforcement for having learned it. So those are the 4 main steps. And then in recent years, I had a young man from Austria who came and studied with me, and he worked in the area called volition, and it has to do with the main body of the ARCS model is how to build a sense of motivation, make the student want to learn, and persist. But then once they go out and begin to apply what they've learned, especially like if you're taking multiple courses, you might feel that, well, I've got too much to do. I don't have time to do this, or I'm getting discouraged. So the final step is how do you maintain their motivation over time? And that's where the volition comes in, is continuing motivation. So that's why I added the V to the ARCS model. And then he went back to Austria, and I expanded the ARCS model, so now it has that final dimension. That's how it evolved over time. And that's the that's the conceptual foundation of the ARCS model. Then the next step was to make it practical, build a set of practical strategies. The goal, of course, is to make the student want to learn, as opposed to the traditional behavioral psychology approach, which is just provide external rewards, external stimuli, external environment to promote learning. But the ARCS model focuses more on what are the internal dimensions, internal dynamics that lead to a desired level of motivation. And so that was one of the main things that prompted it and has sustained it over time. So anyway, that's an overview of the ARCS model and how it came to be.
Yeah, as I studied it, and in some of your articles, you emphasize that is the really it is really focusing on the external stimuli, on the external behavior and for behavior and outcome. That is become, and then it becomes unbalanced with learners' desire from the inside. So it is a process of change from the outside stimuli, and then really intrinsically like motivate the learner's motivation, that they feel that it is an important subject, and it is related to them, and they have to learn it because it is going to create value for them. Is that the basic thinking behind it?
Yes, I think that's well stated.
And in the we just mentioned the ARCS model, and thank you for explaining. And I didn't know that how it came, and but I guess there must be a long story behind the very simple ARCS model, and here it is. And you did have a very long story. I assume that in the room that you even have 4 or 5 students, but that's only the beginning, and then later on you have piles of works and research and different cycles and different phases, and then finally you came down to ARCS. But
right.
yeah, and also I see that there are many broken downs. We can come back to that later. But to the ARCS model, and I also want to not only pay respect, but mention Ganet's, Bob Ganet's 9 events of instruction.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also very classic, same as the ARCS model. So in his 9 events of instruction, the first event is attention.
That's right.
Draw the learner's attention. So are there any differences? So what's your ARCS model's difference and the relations to the 9 events of instruction?
When I joined the faculty at Florida State University, he was still here. He was still alive and still teaching. And after I had been here for 1 or 2 years, and I was teaching my ARCS model, he was very centered toward his own work, and the other faculty members all were like disciples of Gagne. And so one day he came over to my office and he said, "John," I said, "Yes." He said he wanted to know more about my work, more about motivation. And so he took some of my articles and things and read them, and then he incorporated a whole chapter on motivation in the next edition of his book, Conditions of Learning. And what he had not really dealt with motivation. I mean, attention, the first step is just that, get people's attention.
Right.
A snappy sound, something to get attention. And then at the end, reinforce the learning. And that was really the only element that he gave to motivation. But then in that next edition of his book, he incorporated some of my material plus some other material and everything to make it his own. So that was the background of what I would call the absence of a focus on motivation in his theory, which he then expanded to include it.
So you were colleagues with Bob Gagne for
That's
more
right.
than 10 years, for more than 10 years. He passed away in 2002.
Mm-hmm.
And what he just take this opportunity, because none of us, I didn't met him, I didn't have the opportunity to. What is he like? I know he has a he's a big, tall man and big build, right?
Yes, he's very and he was very kind of gruff, you know, very. It's sort of a. I remember at a conference, you know, an AECT conference, he
Yeah.
was trying to do a presentation, and he didn't like the position of the microphone, and he tried to adjust it, and it wasn't cooperating, and so he just slapped it and made the microphone go around in a circle, you know, and one time when several of us carpooled, we drove in the same car to a conference, and he always liked to stop at the Waffle House, which is a fast food place, you know,
Yeah.
and eat fast food. And so he wasn't very healthy that way, but he had very strong opinions, you know, and of course he was a huge contributor. So, but I didn't attend any of his classes, but I think he was a traditional model. You know, he would do lectures, and then just that was basically it. You know, he would he didn't have class activities and class participation and that kind of thing. He would just do his lectures and then leave.
Right. During the in his non-event self-instruction, well, I've been studying his non-event self-instruction and also your ARCS model, and I combined it, I integrated it in this way, and I want to ask you to verify if if I'm doing the right thing, and because this is non-events of instruction, here's step 4 to step 7, which are the providing the stimuli, giving them the opportunity to practice and feedback and internal organization and all of that. So those 4 steps is kind of an internal little cycle. But how do you inject the modules or the motives for the learners to learn? Yes. At the very beginning, he did say, as you said, is like it is like a snap or just clapping or by some physical actions to draw people's attentions, but not intrinsically that really draw their attention, make them think, this is important. But I kind of integrate the ARCS model with 9 events of instruction and make the ARCS model as a macro model overshadowing the 9 events of instruction, and then sometimes I flip them. Sometimes I flip them inside the step 4 and step 7, and I use ARCS model again. So in other words, ARCS model sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small,
right.
And they can be used in a whole 1 week course, which I designed, 1 week intensive training. But it can also be used in 1 knowledge point. Is that the way that ARCS model should be used?
It sounds good to me. I haven't thought about the events of instruction in a long time, but one of the things we sometimes forget is that these models have to be used in conjunction with an instructional design process, and sometimes analyzing learners. You don't design every lesson the same way. In other words, in some situations, the learners, you know ahead of time that they're going to be interested in the content. So you don't have to do a lot of motivational strategies at the beginning. You can just move right into the content and make sure you're incorporating tactics that sustain motivation during that process. In other situations, the students are they're not interested, they don't have the background. So yes, you have to give more attention to motivation at the beginning, more attention to motivational design as you ease into the content and stretch the content out over time. So there's an awful lot that has to be done in regard to learner analysis to determine the sequence of motivational versus instructional events and the amount of depth you have to go into to stimulate and sustain their interest.
Right. It's my practice, and thank you for verifying that. And it is my practice, and has been doing that for some time. And also, it comes to another question, that the adult learning theory in the practical world, we we train organizational members or target audience or adults. And so how does ARC's model work in comparison with adult learning theory or the characteristics of adult learning?
Yeah, well, quite a few years ago, I worked with a fellow who was in the adult learning program, and he, he made a big distinction between andragogy and pedagogy, and but as I studied it, I didn't find that to be very useful, because instructional system design as an approach takes the you start with the learners, and analyze them. And andragogy, I think, they make a lot of assumptions that are not valid for adults any more than they are for children, or vice versa. In other words, I think adults and children have similar learning processes. It's just a matter of, by design, emphasizing those things that are most appropriate for your audience under the conditions that they're working under and with the background that they bring to the situation. And so I find that the same level of detailed analysis works with children, with adults, both at this, in different ways, but it's the same process.
Thank you for mentioning the concept of andragogy and pedagogy. There are different categories. Of course, the adult learning theory that I've been practicing, and I teach my instructional design class. I also teach an instructional design class. As a matter of fact, I just taught another one. It's called the Certified Instructional Designer, CID program. Mm-hmm. And I told them that adult learning, one of the biggest experiences is they won't learn if it's not useful.
That's right. Yeah.
So it is also based on your ARCS model that drawing their attention, and in your theory that there are not many, but there are several subcategories. And I mean, under each ARCS, there are 3 categories. And each category contains very detailed meanings. Like in the attention, there's a perceptual arousal, inquiry arousal, and variability. So, and each one of them has relevance, have goal orientation, motive matching, familiarity. So how do you why did you break them up into 4? I mean, each one of them into 3 subcategories, and what's the reason of that, and what's the purpose of that?
Yeah, that was somewhat of a coincidence, but in determining which concepts from the psychological literature went under each, the broad categories of ARCS, then we began to look at the details of the concepts within each category, and as well as the supporting theories and concepts. And so it was kind of a natural growth of out of each of those. So like attention, getting attention, sustaining attention, and everything. It just came. It was an empirical approach. It came from analyzing the components of each major category.
Mm-hmm. How should an instructional designer, an ID, and an SME, as the subject matter expert, collaborate? I mean, design their course with the ARCS model in mind. Normally an instructional designer, they will follow their ADDIE model or other models, but how do they apply ARCS model?
Well, I think the most important thing is the audience analysis at the beginning. When you analyze an audience in terms of their prerequisite knowledge and skills, which is a normal part of the instructional design process, you also, once you've determined what the content of the course is going to be, determine their motivational attitudes, and determine the degree to which students will be interested in the content, not interested, feel threatened by it, or feel confident. So you go through and do the audience analysis. And in some areas, you may not have to do anything with motivation. In other words, the students are eager to learn it and they want to learn it, but maybe they're nervous and afraid that they can't learn it. So you put your primary emphasis on developing a sense of confidence, which means you include extra tactics and strategies to support the confidence development. But, so it's a matter of doing the audience analysis to determine what the motivational problems are and whether you need to just A, sustain motivation, or B, build motivation in that particular area.
And once you determine that there are factors that can be built into the course as motivator, and then everything else follow through, right? The relevance piece and interactivity to let them gain confidence, and then later on give them the EPSS or job aids or whatever to get them satisfied and gain results on the job or performance results on the job.
That's right.
So you mentioned 2 or 3 times that the learner analysis is very important to ARC's model. It seems like.
Yes, it is. Just as it is with the instructional design, determining. But the motivational analysis, using one of the questionnaires that I've created, you can go through and ask yourself ahead of time, is this information going to be stimulating for the learners? Are they going to be interested in it or not? Are they going to, and the same thing with the relevance,
right.
and confidence. And so there's a set of questions corresponding to those categories under each of the major categories. And so you can analyze it ahead of time to determine where the motivational strong points are and where the motivational challenges are.
So it is really, it really all starts in learning, in learner analysis. So based on your description, the ADDIE model or the course design, the instructional design process, such as the ADDIE model and the ARCS model, they can kind of go parallel in process, aren't they?
That's right. I have one of my PowerPoint slides that I use sometimes shows one kind of a cartoon character representing instructional design and another one representing motivational design, and they're shaking hands, that they have to work together to be successful.
So it is really kind of a collaborative. They're like going parallel. They're like twins and they brothers, and they have to go with each other.
That's a good analogy. Yes.
Okay. Good. That really verifies, because in one of the questions that in one of the audience that questions we have is, in collaboration with ADDIE model, should it, what's the relationship between ADDIE and ARCS model? Because that's my question for some time, and my experience is they go parallel. So
one of the when I really worked to develop my model, I realized that in the ADDIE model, traditionally there were motivational factors built into it, but people did not identify them as motivational factors. They were just kind of there. And so my work helped to sharpen the distinction between those things that help facilitate learning versus those things that help facilitate desire or motivation.
Can you describe them? The factors that build into, but
instructional design, the focus is primarily on facilitating learning,
right?
Memory and recall. And with motivational design, the focus is on interest and desire and competence, those kinds of things. And so they interact together, and you have to analyze both aspects of the course to have effective learning.
So in the original instructional system design, it is, I think it is well-rounded enough. And I agree with you that, but, always on top of each model, and then there are kind of a more detailed things are identified, and more practical and valuable things are identified factors, and then that actually there needs to be another model or another theory, kind of a branch out, but focusing on the learners, at one aspect of the learners to make, well, the overall purpose is to make that course better and more engaged, and the internal change from short-term memory to long-term memory, and the recall, and the reinforcement, and the retrieval.
That's
and
right.
To make it more sustainable and can be applied when performance is needed. So yeah, that's very, thank you for clarification of the with the 9 events and with ARC's model and the branches, and with the relation, especially the relationship with the ADDI model. So yeah, there are other questions around it. The 4 components of ARCS, the ARCS model, the attention, the confidence, and the relevance and confidence and satisfaction. So are these 4 factors are all necessary in one course, or are they selective?
Well,
that's $1 million question, by the way.
No, that's a good question. And on the one hand, yes, they're all necessary.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, no, they're not. In other words, in order for learners to be fully engaged, these are the 4 factors that influence it. Their feelings of, but in some courses, these things are more inherently there. You don't have to do anything. In other words, if you're teaching somebody to swim, and you put them in the water, suddenly the lesson on swimming becomes very relevant, but the confidence might be a problem. So you have to just focus on building confidence. So that's where the analysis is so important, that in any given situation, you have to determine, do I have to do something external? I mean, do I have to bring something to the situation to build a stronger sense of confidence? And if so, what is the confidence problem? Students might be overconfident. Oh, I already know this. And if they have that belief, they tend not to pay attention to details. They don't learn effectively. So you have to determine if they're underconfident, overconfident, or if there is a confidence problem, what is it, and how are you going to counteract it? Whereas relevance might not be a problem. So the point is that yes, all 4 are important. All 4 play a role in a learning situation, but some might not be a problem. They might just be a characteristic of the situation, but not a problem in this situation. So you have to determine which ones do I need to pay attention to as a designer, and which ones just to sustain and not ruin it. Because sometimes students are highly motivated, but the instructor kills it, he doesn't sustain it. So it's one thing to recognize the need to build stronger motivation, but it's also important to recognize when not to kill it or destroy it. So it's maintain that balance.
So you mentioned a very, very good point. That's also one of the questions that I encountered during the application of the ARCS model, is that is based on the ARCS model. The model is there, and when we design, build a series of activities around it, and the ARCS model, the success of ARCS model, but is based on the assumption of all the factors are achieved or successfully, like the confidence, like the swimming, like if they're not drinking water, swallowing water, too much water from the pool, and then drinking too much, and that will jeopardize the level of confidence, not to mention satisfaction. Is that right?
That's for sure. That's definitely true.
So it is really a systematic design in that way. It must be a very systematic fashion, and based on your detailed learner analysis, their entry knowledge and the prior prerequisites, and then we have to be really careful when we design. So the instructional designs, the ADDIE model is there. So when we design different activities around the the learning objectives, and then we have to bear in mind that there's a ARCS model behind it, or on top or beneath, but around it, and then we need to make sure that that activity is a success, and that success factor will contribute or access to another level in the ARCS model itself, but it goes parallel with the instructional design with the learning objectives achieved one by one in the ISD process.
Because the ARCS model incorporates that understanding of human motivation, the different categories that contribute to whether or not a human being is motivated or not, and then motivational design is how do you interact with the results of determining those motivational factors. Whether
Right.
So there's the understanding part of it, and then there's the design part of it that you bring to bear to build an effective learning environment.
Great. So for this year's, I always regarded ARCS model is a concept model, is not an operational model. Am I correct or am I wrong?
Not a what model?
Not an operational model.
Operational. Well, it's both. I think it's a concept model, and that it synthesizes the research on motivation, divides it into meaningful categories, but then that provides the foundation for the operational part, the bringing motivational design into bear to analyze the learners, analyze the environment, determine where there are motivational strengths and motivational weaknesses, and then build solutions to the problems.
Yes, thank you. So it is both, and it is both. So in that sense, when I see it, as I described earlier, I synced it with ADDIE and then ARCS model. ADDIE and the ARCS model, they go together like this,
Yes.
from the left to the right. So anyway, thanks for the clarification. The ARCS model, a couple weeks later, weeks earlier, I interviewed Dr. Dick Clark.
Oh yeah, Richard Clark. Yeah.
Yeah, Rich Clark, and Dick is a really, really good scientist, also like yourself, and he also in conducting some research into motivation, like the workforce motivation, and he recently published an article on HBS, Harvard Business Review, and he said his model is similar to yours. But I didn't mention your name, but when I interviewed, but now I recall during my interview with him, and later on after I watched the interview, his model, workforce motivational model, is BEC, 3 letters. BEC is belief, expectancy, and control.
Okay.
So belief, expectancy, and control, and I think it is very similar to what ARCS model is. But but both of yours are motivational models, but they're on different purposes. He's more on workforce, performance motivation, and yours is more on learning during the learning events.
Well, when I was on the faculty at Syracuse University, they hired him to be the department head. And so he became familiar with my work. And I think there are some some foundational ideas in his work that were derived from my work, although he doesn't say that. But those concepts of his, he created them after he became familiar with my work. And but we had a good relationship. And so his model focuses more on business. Mine is more on learning environments, but my work really is can be applied in any context. It doesn't. It's because it's a design model. It's a problem-solving model, and so you build everything into it: the learner analysis, the age, setting, environment, context, and then begin to incorporate strategies where there are gaps, where there are problems. So it's really kind of an omnibus model. But yeah,
So it can be omnipresent.
yes, but he has a more focused
Right.
context of application.
Well, that really moves into my next question. ARC's model is about learner motivation and can be applied for learning environment and purposes. Could it be extended to organizational team level that achieving their target?
Yes, I during my most active time as a professor, I did a lot of consulting work with corporations. You know, I mean IBM and
Right.
Citibank and others, and so we often would talk about the motivational environment in the workplace, and these ARCS concepts apply not just to learning, but also to work, to performance. And so they, you know, does your work environment include things that make the learner feel reinforced? You know, I mean, I don't need to go through the whole list, but yes,
Mhm.
definitely it applies to those environments. I haven't written article. That hasn't been my main area of focus, but uh, but other people have applied it in those work environments.
Mhm. Great.
Let's see here. Yeah, organizational team level when they
Right.
achieve their target. Absolutely. Yes,
Mhm.
it can be applied
Can be
because it's
applied.
really because the ARCS model, see, it's not just built on a gimmick, you know, the idea of some kind of a catchy acronym or something like that. It's
Right.
grounded in basic psychological research on human motivation. And then
Right.
from there, I build up to the different components of human motivation, and then aspects of it that apply. I focused in a learning environment, but certainly it could be applied in any environment.
I think so. I think it is a team motivation in any. I mean, in business environment is also. I mean, you need to draw employee attention. You need to get them know that they're related to their salary or
Yeah,
wages or any promotion, and then you provide necessary tools and processes and resources, and to get them confident that they can do the job. And after they do the job, they got proper reward for doing
that's
that job.
right.
And they got
Absolutely.
satisfaction. Bingo.
Yes, I totally
So
agree.
yeah. So in other words, it's a universal model. So on and so forth. Is so and so called. Is that true?
What you say again?
I can use that as a universal model for
Oh, I
the
think yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then you ask.
like.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
You
Go
ask
ahead, please.
about its applying it to the increase the engagement level in e-learning, and
Right. That's what I'm going to
yeah,
ask next.
that um, yeah, I just had a webinar with a university in Turkey. You know, a former, you know, a fellow that I'd worked with over there, and they were doing a workshop for medical doctors who were had to do lectures. You know, do also participate in the medical education. And traditionally, they were just going to do a lecture and then leave. But now with the pandemic, they can't do that. They have to teach online, and they're
Mm-hmm.
complaining because the participants get get bored. They get tired after about 20 minutes. You know, they're tired of listening on the e-learning thing. So they're wondering how can they improve their instruction to make it more interesting and motivating. And so I had to talk to them about things to do to increase the engagement level. You know, things like that. Just when you think as a designer, it's pretty obvious. But when you're not, when you're used to just talking, you know, it's not obvious to you. Things like, uh, you know, have your lectures be no more than 15 or 20 minutes, and followed by a set of exercises or something where they have to apply what they've just learned or just listened to some kind of a problem solving activity. So
Mm-hmm.
you intersperse problem solving activities every 15 or 20 minutes. Or you open the lecture with a problem, you know. I mean, assume you have a patient has these problems, these characteristics. How would you go about diagnosing it, and then have the instruction provide the approach or the answers to the problem that you presented at the beginning. Well, as educators, well, not always, but we tend to think about those things. So yes, the engagement level can be improved by giving the learners a meaningful role instead of just being passive listeners. They have to try to apply what they've learned or create a problem or that kind of thing.
So it is great. You have many students you have many students from all of part of the world over the years, and you just mentioned from Turkey and from Africa, and also, well, I came to know that Dr. Suzuki, a common friend of ours, Dr. Suzuki from Japan.
Sorry about that. There.
No
Say that again, please.
Yeah, you have so many students all over the world. Dr.
Yes.
Suzuki was your doctoral student many years ago from Japan.
Oh yeah, Dr. Suzuki.
Yep.
Yeah. You said you met him at a conference, so.
Right, and he and I were IBS TPI colleagues, and we were both directors on that board, the International Board of Directors for Training, Performance, and Instruction. So that is a standard board. So anyway, my question is, you have over the years, ARC's model stayed intact, stayed very stable, and stayed the same, and it's been tested. Has it evolved? I mean, what's the evolvement of ARC's model? Did you find it any like extension or development or escalation or?
Okay. Well, the addition of volition has been the main extension of it, and that's really extending it beyond the initial design phase of motivation to when you're out, when you're motivating people to participate in something or learn something, then as time goes by, their motivation tends to erode because they have competition from other activities in their lives and everything. So the volition talks about how to sustain motivation over time. That's been the main change. I think the primary reason for the stability of the ARCS model is because I really, I had a strong background in psychology and philosophy. And so the modes of inquiry, modes of knowing was a big part of my life. And so the ARCS model is grounded in basic knowledge of human learning motivation. It's not just a gimmick, like 3 categories of this or a 9-step process for that. It's grounded in a comprehensive synthesis of the factors that influence human motivation, and then putting them into different categories. Now, the fundamental structure of the 4 categories and the 3 subcategories under each is very stable. But when you get down to specific strategies and tactics for how to do those things, it varies quite a bit depending on the cultural context, the part of the world you're in. I mean, the kinds of tactics that a person would generate in Indonesia would be different from Greenland, or someplace. That it depends on the on the cultural and educational factors of the environment that you're in, that you have to modify it to find out how can I achieve a stimulation, the ARCS in this environment, because things that might be rewarding to people in one context would not be in a different context. So anyway, so I'm being I'm kind of floating over the top here, but I'm simply trying to say that the fundamental structure is stable because it's grounded in basic psychological concepts and theories.
Right. And now people call it the motivational design theory. So, and of course, the motivational design theory, ARCS model is. And so why do you change the name to motivational design theory instead of just ARCS model?
Oh, well, uh, that's a tough question. I'm trying to remember back. I've been doing that for so long. It was the ARCS model, which is a model of motivational theory. It's really motivational theory and design. You know, the ARCS model is the kind of the motivational content, the different categories and all, and then the
Right.
motivational design is the addition of the design process to that theory, that set of categories.
Great. Great. I know we have been looking around the on the ARCS model and motivational design for a long time, but well, thank you for explaining in detail the ground and the form ground and also the psychological basis of the ARCS model. So coming back to the current pandemic,
Yeah,
so. Well, first of all, where are you based right now? Which city are you in?
I'm in Tallahassee.
Oh, you're in Tallahassee, of course, of course. Well, be aware of the hurricane season's coming.
What's that?
Be aware of the hurricane season's coming.
Oh, yes, it sure is. Yeah, we've had,
Yeah,
in fact, there's one headed up this way right now.
I know. I heard it. I
Yeah.
heard about that. So, and so the current pandemic, of course, you're retired, but how do you predict that the pandemic will impact our field? Are there any lessons learned from the pandemic so far?
Well, I think that's a yeah, that's a tough question. I already talked about the doctors in Turkey, how it's affected them, how they have to
Right,
change
right.
their mode of teaching, and they need support for how to do that. So I think that's going to be true in a lot of areas where the schools cannot resume in their traditional practices and processes, that teachers will have to learn how to teach remotely, teach online, and do that in a way that's not just, you know, moving their lectures online, but actually
Right,
learning to teach online, learning
right,
strategies and processes. I think
right.
that's the number one thing that that will be a challenge that the pandemic will stimulate.
So the pandemic really changed our world. Well, of course, everyone's saying that we're forced online, we're go virtual. Well, without the pandemic, well, thanks to the pandemic is a global disaster, but well, thanks to the pandemic, then it accelerated our training delivery. It kind of
Well, a lot of
diversified.
people, as I'm sure you know well, a lot of people when you talk about, well, let's change this to teaching online, it's
Yeah,
all they're doing is shifting their traditional lecture model onto a electronic environment. They're not really learning to use the capabilities of the online environment to stimulate and sustain learner motivation as well as
right.
learning.
Right. That's
In
what you
fact,
just mentioned. My question to you, how do we increase engagement level in the e-learning? And a lot of people just use them, putting or converting their face-to-face instruction led training into online environment. And
yeah,
then they call the e-learning or technology-enabled learning. And then it become giggle, garbage in and garbage out.
yes, exactly right. You know, and when you think about it, historically, a great deal of classroom instruction was
Right,
same as quote online learning. In other words, the students would all be the students would all be in one place instead of scattered out at various computers. And the
right.
instructor would come in, give the lecture, and then leave, which is just it's that's not really classroom instruction. That's just face-to-face delivery. So it's, you know, we in this field we've really struggled for generations or for decades to try to get instructors to learn how to be more participative and interactive with the students and stimulate student activity. So that's not a new challenge.
It is not a new challenge, but the pandemic really accelerated the appearance of this old challenge
I
because
agree.
yeah, back in the 1980s and 90s, and when well, with the emergence of PC, personal computer, and online learning became possible, and then the interactivity and human motivation and the learner motivation, the involvement and engagement during those learning activities have always been a problem. And we call it page turners, the page turners online, and then their giggles and page turners. Those are the old problems, and it's an old worm. But even though it's a new can, but it's the old worms. And I know your time is.
I like your analogy there. The old can with new worms. That's great.
It is really, because 20 years ago when I was when I was working in the US West, the company US West, or Bell Company, and we were having we were very big into e-learning, and we committed all the probably mistakes that could possibly a e-learning designer could possibly run into. So and now, looking around, I'm in China, I'm looking around, and micro learning is so popular. Micro learning is so popular. I mean, so popular, and everybody wants to do micro learning. But I told them, well, a majority of your micro learning is not micro learning, it's micro information software package. Because it is only information, and then information from point A to point B.
That's right.
And it doesn't go from here to here. It doesn't go through the learner's brain convert from short-term memory into long-term memory, because there's no enforcement, there's no process, there's no learning transfer, there's no reinforcement to convert short-term memory into long-term, which is the trainer's job.
That's a good point.
So, that still exists today. John, many decades later, and still committing the same mistake over and over and over again. That's why I want to have this, TMS series, and with thinking gurus and thought leaders like yourself, and then to really say that and let them know that training is a science and instruction is an art. That's my motto, and that's what I said. Training is a science and instruction is an art for more than 20 years. Good and point. That's my learning. Yeah, that's my learning. And of course, as you just said, that ARC's model is really based on solid psychological grounds. And I do want to take this opportunity to say, John, thank you for doing all the work all these years.
Oh, well, thank you for appreciating it. It means a lot to me.
I never had the opportunity to thank you in person, but at least virtually, at least now.
Well, this is basically the same as in person.
You bet. And I told Roger that my next trip to the U.S., Tallahassee, is a must stop.
Yeah. The problem with Tallahassee is it's not on the way to anywhere else. It's not convenient to travel to Tallahassee.
Well, there's always a service called rental car.
Yeah, there we go.
I know your time, and John. So before I let you go, I have two more questions, small questions. One is, if you have a chance to start all over again, what would you have done differently?
Well, that's an intensely personal question, because I know, but I mean, like most people, my life is so full of different events. It's hard to separate things out. Nobody in my family had a history in higher education or anything, so almost everything I've done has been a new frontier, a new beginning, and wanting to establish economic security at the same time that I was establishing myself academically. So I had actually began my career in business management, and then I didn't find that to be very it got boring after a while. That's when I went back to school and majored in philosophy as an undergraduate, and that really was exciting to me. and then that led to my further education in in substantive areas like economics and logic and so forth. So that I would not want to change. I would want to have that background again. But then with my bachelor's degree, I went into teaching. I taught secondary school, and I had a very good experience there. I learned a lot of lessons that paid off later on. But when I eventually, after teaching high school for a few years, I went on to graduate school, and there you have the record there. But after I graduated and went to Syracuse, I, of course, as an assistant professor, and I had 3 kids, it didn't pay very much money, and so I was trying to find ways to earn some extra money through projects and consulting and so forth, and so that turned out to be rather successful. And when I eventually came down to FSU, I built a very strong consulting career along with my academic career. And while I learned valuable lessons from doing that, things that paid off in developing concepts and theories that were not just textbook interesting, but actual real interesting. I mean, I think my work has appealed to a lot of people because they find it's real. It applies to their lives and their academic settings, and so it's not just a book. It's real stuff. So I would, on the one hand, I would want to continue that, but on the other hand, I think I did too much of it. For a while there, it was very rewarding to go to these cities, these big corporations, and work on projects and so forth, and it paid well. But as I said, it took away from my academic work, and I feel like I've always felt like I could have accomplished more academically if I hadn't done quite as much as on a consulting role. But all in all, I feel very good about the way it all blended together and resulted in the work that it has resulted in. So I think that what I would have done differently would be to have focused more on the academic publishing side, a bit less on the applied consulting side. That's.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a really thank you. And I've learned a lot and from your articles and from your book, and and I've been applying to them. And this question you can answer this question in many ways. And I ask this question at near the end of each interview, at the end of each guest interview. So anyway, just a small follow-up question about that is that what type of consulting business you do? What top subjects are on your instructional design or motivational design when you do that?
Interesting. My early work was in instructional design, with facilitating the development of learning packages, and then I began to, over time, incorporate more motivation. Almost all of my work on motivation, workshops and so forth, was with academic institutions, and with corporations it was almost all instructional design. I helped with IBM develop one of their primary instructional design models, but it wasn't easy to bring the two together. So I think so I lived in 2 worlds, the real world of creating instruction, creating curricula, learning how to do that effectively with people with differing backgrounds, all of that kind of thing. And that related to my background in business management. And then on the other hand was the academic side, where I created the ARCS model and did workshops and presentations primarily in an academic environment. But bringing the 2 worlds together, that was when it finally began to be most rewarding to me.
It is sometimes it's really hard, but it is really so much fun to bring both worlds together at a cross.
Yes, it is.
it requires the capability.
Right.
And so which year was that? I'm very interested in the IBM. So which year did you develop the instructional system design process for IBM? Because I was working for IBM for a couple of years when I was overseeing the IBM learning and learning development function in China.
Yeah. Well, it was probably around 1986 or something like that.
Much earlier.
The early models that they used were based on adult learning theory, and and they weren't satisfactory as far as guiding actual design of instruction. And so a fellow named Tom Warner, well, somebody from my program went to work for IBM, and he recommended to his boss, Tom Warner, that he contact me. And so he contacted me, and then I began to do some consulting work with him, and I helped create what was called the SATE model, SATE, Systematic Approach to Training and Education. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I've got books over here on my shelf, the primary books that came out of that. Very detailed and very, very competent, very thorough. So that was a very valuable learning experience for me, even though I wasn't getting any quote publications out of it. But then in my academic world, it helped enrich the academic work I did to make it practical. So as you know, I'm sure quite well. So many academic people, they write stuff all the time, but it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't help with anything. It's just it's logically the next step in a process, but it doesn't make any difference in terms of influencing human behavior. So I really enjoyed the the work in both areas, and being able to do work in the academic side that definitely influenced human behavior, as well as explaining aspects of it that were not relevant. So anyway, I'm not sure. Did I answer the question?
Yes, of course, definitely, absolutely. Did you find? I'm assuming you also found that working, spending time on the consulting projects with businesses is also rewarding back to your academia work.
Oh, absolutely, and it gave me. I was able to build learning activities in my classes, that were very realistic and meaningful, and not just simple little activities that were I don't know how to describe them, but anyway, but the students really liked my learning activities in my classes, because I would create scenarios, and then they would learn something, learn a process, learn a concept, and have to apply it. And so that was a rich experience.
That's one of the problems that right now China faces. I'm sorry I'm lingering on this question a little bit longer, but that's really one of the biggest problems that China faces. Right now, we don't have even a master's degree on human resources and development. So now we have like 20 million practitioners in China. That's a small number.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, just in case, but anything hitting China is a big number. But right now, one of the biggest root causes, root problem is the faculties. The faculties at the normal university, we have those programs, like we have Department for Instructional Technology, Department for Courses, Department for Instructional System Design. But the faculty is a problem, because they only read some. They're really sometimes they're really scholars, but they lack the practical experience. So when they give intern opportunities, if you know somebody in the big corporations, you can send them your students and send them their way, and then the students are very thankful to you. Like my advisor. He had the students like from China alone. He had like 19 students alone. I mean, over the years, and each of ours are very successful in our training and learning development careers. And because he like you, he done a lot of consulting, and he knows like 3Ms, he knows Northwest Airlines. At that time, he knows Best Buys, he knows all the big Cargills, and so he sent the big his students away on their way to for internship, and sometimes if they have the headcount, they stayed. So that really helped.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It helped. I helped a lot of my students get good jobs with those companies too, because they would come here
There you
and
go.
recruit, because of the work I was doing with them.
Thank you. Thank you. Last question, John. If you had any advice to as a closure, as a closing statement, if you had any advice to the young practitioners in China or from other developing countries, what would you say?
Well, yeah, I guess my advice is to be what was it? I'll think of it in a minute. But I think the focus on the real world as well as academics and integrating the two, focus on learning the concepts and theories that you have to learn to pass, but also focus on application. Sometimes application is considered to be lower status than theory and concepts. But I think you really have to integrate the two to have meaningful learning. And so, right. Even if your professor doesn't give you meaningful projects to use to apply the content you're learning, try to find ways on your own of applying what you're learning to different settings in a job you're doing or within the course, find contexts of application. So I think it's in application that the stuff becomes real for people in fields like ours, which are a blend of a theory and practice. Theory and practice. Yeah, it's both. It's not just application, but it's what I can't. I'm blocking on the word I'm trying to think of, but praxis, praxis. Praxis. It's the focus on practicum, practicality, and work. The Greek word. So I think I don't know what to say except just even in my own courses sometimes it was very obvious to me that people were in the course only because they wanted the credits, because they wanted the degree to get a job. They weren't really interested in the content, and it's very difficult with some of them to make them interested in the content or to stimulate their interest in the content. So I think trying to find ways for young practitioners in developing countries, be curious, find ways to apply what you're learning, and learn what you're learning, not just with a view to passing a test, but actually gaining something personal from it in terms of useful knowledge and skills. There's a famous folk song singer, Woody Guthrie, and he said, people ask him, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to do next? And he says, well, I don't know. He says, I just want to stay around long enough to see what's going to happen next. In other words, sustain your curiosity as time goes by. I know I met people who were old, psychologically old by the time they were 30 years old. They would go to school, they would get a job with a store, they would get an income, and then they would their life was stagnant. It just didn't go anywhere. But try to, I think, keep the curiosity door open. Keep the curiosity door open. That's what I would recommend, and see where it leads you.
Woody Guthrie, is that the person who also established the Guthrie theaters?
No, he was a folk singer. Oklahoma.
Okay. Anyway, you're absolutely right to really focus on the practice and blend it in, and that is so important.
Yes, and the theory is important too, because to know why you're doing what you're doing rather than just following a set of prescriptions. All right. Well, the rules say to do this. The rules say to do number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. Well, why? What's behind those rules? What concept, what theory, what principles? So it's all important from the theory, not from the theory, but the theory and the practice. You know, it can go either way, but both are. I just think maintaining a curious mind, that's the most important thing.
That reminds me an article that I had when I was an English major back in 1987 in the intensive English reading in our textbook. There's an article called "The Modular Man." The Modular Man. You know,
Wow.
the life is a chore. You know, at this age you get married, and then at this age you get a kid, and then at this age you got a college degree, you go to work, you buy a car, loan a house, you know, mow your
Yeah,
lawn. So it's a formula life of formula, and it's called the modular man because there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that kind of assembled into a man, but
that's
it's
right.
kind of soulless sometimes.
I know one of my best friends when I was in the United States Marine Corps. When he got out, he uh, he was discharged about the same time I was, and he went to work in California for a fast food restaurant chain, and he
Mm.
got married, and he had his job, and they had a kid, and it was the same thing. I went out to visit them, and he was a modular man, the perfect example. You know, they had their they had this plan. You know, they had new furniture in the living room, and it still had plastic wrap on it. They didn't want to take their plastic off because it might get dirty, and they had and their next step was to buy a deep freeze to put in the kitchen. You know, to buy large quantities of vegetables and meat and put in there to have available. So, but they had everything organized around these material things that they wanted to protect and acquire, and that was their life. You know.
Yeah.
Um,
There's nothing wrong about it, but it's just a way of life. It's just
yeah.
different.
Well, and what did they talk about? They talked about the songs that were popular when they were in high school, you know, and things like that. They didn't. What's going on in the real world today? What are you going to do tomorrow? Well, same as today, you know.
Grab a beer,
Yeah.
go to the backyard and barbecue.
Yes.
There you go. Well, thank you, John. Thank you so much on behalf of all of our audiences here in China and
Okay.
in maybe in other developing countries. We really thank you. I personally cannot thank you enough for following your work, your Ox model, and it's been over 20 years, over 25 some years that I've been introduced to your Ox model, and ever since I loved it. And over years, I found that's a quarter century, 25 years.
It is, yes. Well,
Anyway,
well,
well,
George, this has been a thrilling discussion. You know, I really appreciate your enthusiasm about the ARCS model, all the work you've done with it, and your very, very knowledgeable interview, you know, with instructional design, motivational design, adult learning, all of these things. So it was a very stimulating and rewarding conversation that we had.
thank you, John. Thank you for the support. Thank you for the encouragement. And this master's TMS is really rewarding to me because I'm meeting the gurus and thinking leaders and the thought leaders and leaders and beacon figures in this field. And I've learned a lot. And so stay safe during the pandemic. And
Yeah,
I'm sure that you're doing all the necessary, and stay safe and stay in touch.
yeah, you too. I really enjoyed it, George. Thank you for having me.
I really enjoy it too. And next time when I'm in Tallahassee, you're on my top of my list to visit. So we'll
Okay.
go and grab a beer or grab a dim sum or
Yeah,
something
that would be
later.
great.
Yeah, great. So thank you,
You're welcome. Thank you for
thank
having
you. Yep, thank you, and bye bye.
me. Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
You too.
That's my interview with Dr. John Keller. I learned a lot. That was a very, very interesting discussion, and I hope it could last longer. I learned a lot. I don't know. How about you? I did. I hope you did too. our conversation around ARCs indeed is very interesting. ARCs model has been tested and proven to be a very effective universal model for motivation. It's not only for learning development, but also for other functions, other organizations in any culture probably, because the principles behind it really works. So ARCs model is not only working, not only for the past half century, but it is also developing itself, like the V at the very end, added ARCS and V. So that's a new model. So I hope that you can, and we all can continuously study the ARCs model and inject learner motivation into their daily learning activities. You know, about 10 years ago, when I was overseeing the IBM's learning and development in China, and was called the business unit is called the global delivery. Somebody asked me, George, of course from outside the company, George, what's your dream job? What's your goal as a learning head? And I said, well, I hope I can lose my job. And they were stunned and asked why. And I said, well, if every employee, they can be self-motivated, they can go and grab their like hungry and very thirsty to quench their thirst, to fill their stomach, and they're trying to find everything tangible, everything that within their reach they can to learn about their job. I don't have to be there. I don't have to have such a large team, nearly 100 people team to design, deliver, and manage all these learning activities for them. They will do it themselves. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Of course, those are utopian. And someday we know that it will be achieved, but not today. Probably, I hope, within our lifetimes, that will become true. For ARCs model, for learning motivation, thank you, Dr. Keller. Thank you for your contribution over the past half century. Next week, we are going to have the honor to invite the Honorable Dr. Harold Stolovich to be on our show. Dr. Harold Stolovich, we call him Harold, he is a very well-known and internationally famed learning and development expert. He came to China in the year of 2014. He was the keynote for the 2014 training magazine conference, annual conference held in Nanjing. And that year I met him for the nth time. Later on, we met in Montreal, we met in other places. And he is also, he got a numerous awards, including the ISPI Lifetime Award and the CICD, Canadian Society for Training and Development Lifetime Award. He was also the president of ISPI in 1983. And he is also Professor Emeritus from University of Montreal. Our topic is going to be the scientific training design, the scientific interactive training design. The reason to pick this topic is because nowadays, technology advances on a daily basis faster than our imagination. But no matter how fast it develops, the principles and theories behind learning never changes. However, sometimes the training delivery method even become the center of the attention. That shouldn't be, because training is part of the business operation, and training is a business. So we need to treat training more seriously. But how do we design a very serious training into a fun, interactive, very motivational learning game or learning activity? How do we do that? How do we complete the learning transfer from the classroom to workplace performance results? So next week, let's hear what Harold got to say. So until next Wednesday, stay tuned and good night.